So I've got a few different fish here today. The goal today is to ensure that everybody feels comfortable slicing sashimi with the basic elements that come in the sashimi starter kit or the sushi date night box. So here we have 2 pieces of yellowtail. You notice that this piece here is the belly portion. So just looking at this by the anatomy, I can see that this one's sort of elongated and thin. And if you familiarize yourself with the anatomy, this here, you can see the indentations of the rib cage, these indentations, and then this is the belly. So this would actually be the outer edge of one fish. The belly is always going to be thin down here and sort of longer and thinner. We're going to cut that differently. This is the back loin. So this would be the top piece. So these two together would be one side of the fish. And then we have 2 portions of New Zealand King Salmon. This one has the skin on it. We'll talk about how to remove the skin. This one comes already skin off. That one's ready to go. And I've also got some scallops, some Peruvian scallops already de-thawing. I also have a little bit of caviar. So what I want to do is show you guys how to slice these things for a basic sashimi using the accoutrement that comes with the sushi starter kit. So I have this really special soy sauce in the atomizer, organic soy sauce. We have a little bit of ginger, and then I have a couple extra things. If we have time, we can go into making a raw preparation in a different direction, more of like an Italian crudo. So I have some olive oil, some fresh herbs, and some citrus. Also a little bit of fresh spirulina just to do something fun and detoxifying. So yellowtail, a belly portion, which is nice and thin, but extra fatty. You can kind of see the striations of fat here. A little bit firmer, thicker piece of yellowtail, 2 pieces of king salmon. I've got some of my mise en place here, but really what's going to happen here is I'm thinking about how to make a piece of sashimi that is bite-sized out of this fish. And because it's thin and wide, this is the belly quarter, and this is the back loin, I'm going to slice them differently. This one, just so you know, I'm probably going to slice more on a 90-degree angle straight down because it's thick enough to create that piece. This one is so thin that I'm going to slice it on a 45 to create a larger surface area. I'm also going to trim this one different. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I'm going to do when I take a look at this is I'm thinking about the size of the sashimi pieces. If I slice these right now, this piece would be really, really long. So I'm going to actually just take this belly portion off. It's not going to go to waste. It's just not going to be used exactly the same. It has a different application. So I've trimmed that. I'm also going to trim this tail piece just because I'm going to use this for a different application. Why? Because it's a different shape. It's not going to look as pretty if it is really narrow on one edge. And as you get closer to the tail supports a literal pectoral horizontal tail. Same thing of the pectorals and the anal fins. Those have more muscle fiber, more connective tissue to support those. So they're oftentimes a little bit more sinewy, and you have to cut it differently. You have to cut it more thinly so that it's not chewy. All right, so now I have this beautiful kind of squared up piece, relatively uniform. There's a little bit sort of off-centered here, so I can, if I choose, trim that as well. Next thing I note is this piece of beautiful squared off saku block now of yellowtail has this brown edge here. This is the bloodline. Fish actually transfer blood a little bit differently than we do. They don't necessarily just have veins. They also have this area of blood that transfers right through the muscle. So this bloodline oxidizes faster than the rest of it and has more minerally taste to it. So some people, like myself, will eat it right away. But if I'm serving this to my wife, she wants me to cut this off. Also, when cooking it, she wants me to cut it off. You can do different things with it. Then you could, if you were in a sushi bar, you would mix it with mayo and a little bit of hot sauce, and you would make a spicy tuna hand roll or something like that. In this case, in my house, we just feed it to our dog. He loves it. But I'm going to take this little bit of bloodline off. If you can see from the anatomy, it's sort of a triangle of dark brown area there. What I see a lot of people do, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it doesn't always look as pretty, is they'll tend to try to just cut it off like this. Cutting off like this tends to result in sort of a sawing look or effect. A cleaner way to do this is to actually go down and then angle it and go along the edge of the cutting board. So what I'm going to start here, hopefully you guys can see this. I'm going to use the whole knife. I'm actually removing just a little bit of the sort of bookend, and then I'm going to turn the angle until it sort of goes flat. And you'll see now I sort of took this corner off. This allows me to take the majority of that bloodline off and still have a really pretty piece of sashimi. And the reason why I like that is it's a more uniform look and it's a more uniform mouthfeel sort of bite when I go to make those sashimi slices. So I took this sort of irregular shape of yellowtail and I cut it into this saku block in this kind of squared off rectangular. This is now going to allow me to cut very uniform, beautiful pieces of sashimi. And if we look closely at every piece of protein, there's a direction that the muscle fibers go in. This one is primarily going sort of on this 45 degree this way. So when I cut it, if I cut this way, I'm going with the grain and you'll have longer pieces of connective tissue. If I go against the grain, it's actually going to shorten the length of each of those pieces of connective tissue. The result is when I put it in my mouth, it's going to require less chewing for it to actually dissolve on my tongue, for it to melt. So my goal is to go against the grain when I'm trying to make it softer. So in this case, instead of going this way, I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to go against the grain. And my first cut is going to be, again, because it's not super thick, it's going to be sort of a 45 degree. And you'll notice that this first piece is a triangle instead of that perfect little rectangle. So again, it goes over here. I'm trimming a lot. All of this now is my trim. Setting aside, I'm going to use that for something else. But what results is that every subsequent slice is going to be uniform and beautiful and have a similar mouthfeel. And I can choose how thick I want these slices to be. You notice that I'm going on a 45, I'm going against the grain. I'm not going straight up and down because it's a thinner piece. So we're going against the grain. And I'm using the whole knife. This edge of the knife starts here, and I pull the length of the knife, and then I make sure the tip of the knife is actually touching the cutting board before I finish that final piece to separate it. So this is a mistake a lot of sort of newbies do when they're cutting fish, is they'll go back and forth. You have a really sharp knife and a longer knife when you're making sashimi for one specific reason, to make those clean cuts without a sawing motion. If you do this right with a sharp knife, the knife does the cutting, not the downward pressure. So I start up here and I pull the length of the knife, and then I allow the tip of the knife to do that final separation. This final piece is a little trickier, and it's going to again have one triangle that's irregular, but all these should be beautifully uniform and ready for a sashimi presentation. I have my trusty chopsticks here. So these pieces to me feel appropriate for one bite at a time. If you make slices that are larger, it's just an awkward eating experience. If you make them really small, kind of the same. When you're slicing it, think about the eating experience. How large of these pieces do you want? So this to me feels appropriate. I'm actually going to set this aside and I'll show you what we'll do with the belly portion. This is a good example. This here is just that belly piece from the larger belly portion. You'll notice that this piece has a lot of fat in it. You can see the striations of fat. It's a beautiful cut, but if I cut it straight down, I would have little tiny noodles, right? But if I want a piece that's similar to these, instead of cutting straight down, I have to cut it wider. And if I cut it on an angle like this, I can even get more out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of cutting with my knife 90 degrees. I'm going to go more like 45. And I'm going to pull it this way. This allows me to get more surface area out of the belly pieces. This here is that back loin piece. It's quite a bit thicker. So let's talk about trimming this one. Again, tail piece, sort of from about here, is going to come off. Not because they're not going to use it, we're just going to use it differently. Again, tail pieces, you'll notice they have more connective tissue because right back here, there's an actual tail, an actual large tail that needs to push water, and all the connective tissue, the muscle fibers are holding on right there. So as you get back here, there's more fiber, and we're going to have to cut it a lot thinner, smaller pieces in order to really enjoy it, for it to melt in your mouth. Up here, sort of the same thing. We have this head piece. I'm going to sort of even it out. And then over here along the belly, sometimes right around here, you have these other fins, these anal fins, they're called. You'll see a little bit of extra connective tissue here. This was cleaned already, so this one's ready to go, but I do have that bloodline still. Totally edible, but again, the bloodline, the way that blood moves through fish is different than humans. It's not just veins. You also have this blood that moves through muscle, and that's why you get a bloodline, and that's why it's more metallic-y flavor, because that blood carries those different minerals in it. I'm going to remove this, go straight down. I'm actually going to sacrifice just a little bit of this edge to get the knife inside. But once it's in, then I can start angling it to a 45, to a 90. And now once I'm sort of parallel to the cutting board, I can cut that off real clean. See how beautiful that looks? We're doing this because it just looks beautiful. It's more presentable. And we're going to optimize the eating experience. So I took that sort of triangular shape of bloodline right off in pretty much one even piece. This is going to go in our trim pile. Now we have this beautiful piece of yellowtail ready to go. Because this one's thicker, I can go on more of a 45-degree angle and get a relatively nice shape. If I want it to be consistent with this, I might actually angle it just a little bit, but I don't need to angle it too much. So I'm going to do a little bit more of an angle. This first piece is sort of my sacrificial corner. The next pieces are going to be consistent. When we slice salmon in a minute, we'll go thicker because we know that that slice of butter salmon is going to melt in your mouth kind of either way. So you just go as thick as you feel comfortable. Yellowtail that I'm going to just transfer over here to this other plate. So I have a relatively nice selection of sashimi grade cuts, uniform, that came off of the belly piece and the back loin. I also have all of these irregular cuts. Had I tried to make this, use all of this in these sashimi pieces, it wouldn't have this uniform look. It wouldn't have a uniform bite size, and it wouldn't have the uniform sort of texture. So this is going to get used differently. Can you guys see that? The plate closest to me here is all the trim. The plate in the foreground is all beautiful uniform slices designed to have consistent mouthfeel and ready to go. So we can go ahead and plate this. The sashimi starter kit comes with a couple simple, beautiful ingredients. This soy sauce, which is organic, non-GMO, heirloom varietal, aged in oak barrels for over a year, super special. This beautiful fish tastes clean the way it is. You don't need to put a bunch of stuff on it, and you definitely don't want it swimming in soy sauce. That's why we gave you this. Don't let your fish swim in soy sauce. This is designed to distribute an even amount of this soy over the fish. It's not swimming in it. It's just coated in that beautiful umami. This magical stuff. This is one of my favorite components to put on whitefish. This yuzu kosho. Yuzu is a special type of citrus that grows in Japan, and they took the zest, the citrusy zest, not the whole plant, and they fermented it with green chilies. And then they let it age for a year. That's what this is. You're going to use a small amount per bite. Again, we took the time to think about how thin each and how thin and the width of each of these slices of sashimi. We're also going to take the time to think about how much heat we want on each bite. And in this case, I'm going to actually take the time to put just the right amount of heat on each slice. So I'm putting a small dab on every single slice. This might seem like a very labor-intensive process, but it is a work of art. You know, this is culinary art. If you do this right, when you share this with your friends and your family, they're going to have just a loving experience, a lovely, loving experience where they really feel the energy that you put into it. And each bite is sort of thoughtfully crafted for that experience. So I am distributing one little dab per slice of fish. If you're familiar with wasabi and you're sort of afraid of or don't like the heat of wasabi, just know that yuzu kosho is not as hot as wasabi. It doesn't have horseradish, it doesn't have wasabi. It's just a green chili and the zest of a yuzu citrus. So it is a little bit of spice, but more than anything, it's this zestiness. It's this beautiful citrusy hit. And this dish is pretty much ready to go. You can literally serve this as it is, and you will wow people. If you wanted to add more salt, you could hit it just with a little bit of salt. If you wanted to add a little bit more fat, you could hit it with a little bit of olive oil, organic extra virgin olive oil, please. So much time has gone into raising these fish with beautiful organic ingredients. It would be a shame not to use good accoutrement on top of it. If you wanted to up level even more, the sashimi starter kit comes with this beautiful salmon roe caviar, the first harvest. If you're not familiar with this product, how do you use this? You just eat it. You can just eat it like this by the spoonful. And it's pops of fatty, salty brininess. It's just beautiful and it tastes good. It basically adds a little bit of salt, a little bit of texture, a little bit of color, and to any dish. So, oh, I want to add a little bit more color and salt to this dish. I'm just going to throw this on here. And by the way, this is also basically a superfood. This is like all of the nutrients that was concentrated into ensuring that these salmon survive. Salmon put all of these nutrients into this egg because the actual fry, the little fingerling, when it first starts moving and swimming around, it doesn't eat for like 10 days. It just lives off of all the goodness that's in this egg sac. So you're eating these superfoods, you're adding these superfoods right on top of the fish. So again, I'm just adding a little bit of color, a little bit more salty, umami. It looks lovely and it's simple. It just requires maybe a little bit of forethought and planning. It's so simple and it's so good. And what I love about eating like this is it just feels like the nutrients are just transferring right into me. It's like another form of a download, like just so bioavailable, these nutrients, and it's just pops. I'm going to show you another example. We also gave you guys this beautiful artisan pickled ginger. I'm just going to put a little bit on the plate here. I'm going to put just a dab of this yuzu kosho on each bite. Hit it with shoyu. That right there, if I didn't put all of this fish on here and I just served you that right there at a Michelin star, like just imagine just those three pieces at a Michelin star omakase, it would be completely acceptable. Less is more. These ingredients are so clean and beautiful. Just that right there is beautiful and delicious, and it's enough. And some of the fish that we send you guys has skin on it. Why? Because it's super nutritious and delicious, and it protects it from oxidation. As soon as the skin comes off, it is more likely to oxidize and get that sort of browning. Some people don't want to deal with removing the skin, but I'm going to show you how easy it is to take it off. And you can eat that skin. You can cook that skin, you can fry that skin, you can bake it, you can turn it into chips. There's so much concentrated omega-3s in that subcutaneous layer right below the skin. That's where all the goodness is. So, all right, let's look at the anatomy of this piece of fish. If you can see, right in the middle, there's this connective tissue. I'm not going to use that for sashimi. So I'm going to cut on either side of that right down to the skin. So what I'm going to do, hopefully you guys can see this. I'm just going to talk you through this first. I'm going to cut down along right in the middle, right on either side of this connective tissue. Let's remove the skin. We're going to go down the middle, right along the edge of this connective tissue. I'm going to drag the knife until I get right to where about the skin starts. I'm not going to cut through the skin. Now I'm going to make a hard left, and I'm going to try to get my knife flat to the cutting board, and it's going along the skin. And now, if I did this correctly, I removed the skin as thin as I possibly could to get most of that beautiful fat to stay on the fish as possible. And now I still have that connective tissue here because I just went on the left side of it. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to start with this edge of the knife here, right on the other side of that connective tissue. I'm going to go down to the skin, make a hard left, running my knife again along the cutting board. So I now have two very nice sizes of these two beautiful pieces, and I have the skin that came off here. This, if you wanted to, you could bake it, you could dehydrate it, you could fry it, you could feed it to your dogs. They're going to allow me to very easily now make pieces of sashimi that look just like this width, that are this width. So first things first, this piece here, I'm going to go, it's thick enough to where I can basically go 90 degrees straight down. I'm going to go a little bit thicker because I know that this fish is soft and buttery and it's going to melt in your mouth. There's not a lot of connective tissue, nothing you have to chew through. So I can go sort of thicker on this one. Pretty chunky pieces here, but it's going to melt in my mouth. I'm okay with it. As I start to move this way, I noticed as it's coming out the edges, it's not as thick, so I don't want to go 90 degrees. Now I'm going to start angling my knife a little bit more so that I get more surface area. I'm going to mix some fresh spirulina with olive oil. I know this is what wasn't planned, but spirulina is such a beautiful microalgae. It has so many detoxifying properties. It's such a great protein. And it actually, is grown in aquaculture environments. It's something that we're really excited about. And it's so healthy that incorporating these sort of supplements, these live foods into recipes is something that I've been experimenting with more. So I'm sort of just emulsifying this spirulina into that extra virgin olive oil. I'm going to add a couple more elements in here. I'm going to add some Fresno chilies, a little bit of red chili flake, and I just want this to distribute. And I'm going to pour this around the salmon or over the salmon in the style of an Italian crudo. So essentially, a sashimi has raw fish with some umami, some heat, some salt, some fat. And that's a traditional sashimi and really easy. And we gave you a lot of great ingredients to do that. An Italian crudo, super similar, but generally adding a lot of olive oil and more fresh citrus and herbs. So in this case, I'm going to do something similar to an Italian crudo. by pouring this olive oil emulsion here. A little bit more olive oil. And it didn't emulsify as much as I wanted, but that's okay. It's still going to eat well. I'm going to add some more cilantro, which is another beautiful detoxifying herb. There's no right or wrong to do this. When making a crudo, you're just trying to give it those elements, the citrus, the heat, the fat, the salt, the umami, the herbaceousness. Here's a little bit of sesame seeds, a little bit of texture. I have a little bit of more citrusy flavor here. Some pickled shallots here. Fills out those flavor profiles. I mean, you can see this isn't requiring a lot of finesse or technique. It's just about sort of preparing ahead of time a few different herbs and spices. Here I'm just adding a little bit of zest. You could put lemon on here, but the truth is the lemon sort of cooks the fish, and just adding the zest gives you that citrusy note without cooking it. I didn't really want that texture to be compromised. I don't want to cook this fish. I want to let it be fresh, raw, delicious. And there's a beautiful dish. It has a few different components to contrast the flavors of heat, salt, fat, citrus, and also highlights herbs that are specifically detoxifying. I'd like to show you guys how to use these scallops if we still have a minute. These scallops come with the sashimi date night box. You could very easily just remove the adductor, so they are still attached. By still being attached, gives you that extra assurance that they were alive when they were processed. If they were not attached, it's sort of a quality control that you don't have that sort of telltale. But so I just removed that adductor muscle. I could right now just hit it with olive oil, same concept. Add a little bit of fat, add a little bit of salt, add a little bit of citrus in the form of either the yuzu kosho or my lemon zest, maybe a little bit of heat in the form of a chili flake, and a little herbaceousness. And the way I would serve this is just like this. On a platter, I could do 12 of these or 4 per person, and you just move this whole into your mouth and enjoy it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to butterfly these. I'm going to cut this 95% of the way through, and then I'm going to open it up. So right down the middle. And I'm going to stop right at the end, and it's going to open up. This now is my sashimi, and I could put it on top of a piece of nigiri, or I could just lay it out there, or I could lay it back on the scallop shell if I wanted to serve it that way. It looks really nice. Now I have these beautiful pieces of sashimi scallop. We're going a little overboard here. It's getting a little messy, but that's the general idea. I'm going back to using these same tricks over and over because that's sort of right in front of me, but it works. Here's our scallop sashimi. The salmon sashimi. I want to eat it. I'm just going to slice a little bit of citrus here. In this case, it's a pink grapefruit. I'm going to do another crudo here. We'll mix it up with a couple different types of citrus. I'm taking time to remove the pith, which tends to have more bitter notes, so that I can just highlight the fruity citrus notes. So all I'm doing right at the moment is playing with these concepts of citrus. Again, we're playing with these same tools. I have just a little bit of this red flake chili. This is sumac, which has another kind of citrusy note to it, but also sort of a little bit of spice. We're gonna go with flaky salt. And this is sort of like freestyle, right? Like we're just experimenting. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's just in those different notes, right? We had those herb notes, the citrus note, the heat, the spice. Oh, and you know what I almost forgot is one of my favorite ingredients in this sort of profile are pickled onions and capers. Parsley works really well in this environment too. So we're going more of a crudo direction here than a sashimi, but the principles are the same. We're slicing the fish very, very similar. We just decide if we want those traditional umami notes or more of those sort of classic Italian notes, and end up with something unique every time, unless you want to do the exact same dish. But if this was served on a beach in Greece, you'd probably be very happy. I know I would. That's it. It shouldn't be complicated. If you have great ingredients, you don't have to put too much on it. We probably should have said this at the beginning. This is sort of like a traditional Japanese term, often stated at the beginning of the meal to give thanks. Itadakimasu. It was the way it was shared with me is it is a thank you, not just to the people that you're with or the person who cooked the meal, but to the entire chain, the supply chain. And that includes the sun and the microalgae and the fish and the fishermen and the farmers and the delivery driver and all of you. This community is actually, look at that, right on, dude. Good job, chef. I like that nigiri sashimi. That's a beautiful combination. Thank you guys for tuning in today. It's I really appreciate your participation and your enthusiasm and support. Itadakimasu.